Today I interview Ian Steppler, a Canadian beekeeper's blog. Welcome everybody. Let me know if everything is working, if somebody's gonna show up today. Today it's a pleasure and an honor to have a guy that I want to interview and have a chat for a long time. I'm a big fan of him on YouTube. I follow him for many years. Ian Steppler, let me bring you in. Here we go. That's the man himself. How are you?
Good evening. Good. How are you doing, Humberto?
I'm good. I'm so happy you're here. There is so many people asking me to bring beekeepers, and I'm avoiding that because I had that in the back of my mind that you should be the first, and I'm gonna explain. And I'm gonna explain you why. Because I follow you for many years, and I always have the if somebody's gonna come, if the first beekeeper need to be him because you added a lot to my beekeeping skills, to be honest. Nice skills, but I'm from Brazil. I have absolutely no idea how to deal with bees and cold at the time when I arrived here in the United States. So looking for information, and then suddenly I found this guy, a crazy guy that posts almost every day, his whole life there, and I was, who is this guy? It create a lot of curiosity, and it looks like I know a lot about you, and you doesn't know anything about me. You probably get that a lot, right?
Yeah, it's funny how this YouTube thing works, but actually I reflect the same back to you because all of a sudden you started showing up on my YouTube feed and I say, who is this guy? And you're bringing these interesting characters, more of a science study type conversation. And I really appreciate that because it just allows us to be able to dig into all these aspects. And on the live sense, like here, it's really interesting that we can actually interact with you and interact with the guests. So I kind of been tuning into you more and more often.
Yeah, and I'm curious I have a lot of questions, and I know people at home follow you too, and they have questions for you, and they have questions for me, and we create this. It's just fun, It's just fun to get a grab like-minded people together in the middle of the night. Tomorrow is Christmas, and we are here 9 o'clock p.m. here in the United States, and I see a lot of people here, almost 60 people. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, I have to thank you too because we're having Christmas supper with my family here, and it's nice to be able to get away for about an hour, just away from for a bit, and then come with you here, and then I can get back to them. Give me a bit of a break.
Oh, thank you. Wow. Thank you for your time with us. Yeah, I want to start this conversation just to fulfill my curiosity. And, since I follow you, and apparently I feel that I know your operation a little bit because you post so many things, all your troubles, your everyday troubles, your solutions. And I want to know how you start in beekeeping because I don't know that. How do you start in beekeeping? Why you do what you do? When you start to go to YouTube, and what's the motivation to do this? Because this is a crazy project.
Yeah, beekeeping. I mean, that's something that our family was never involved with. Like our farm's been here. We're a century farm this year, so we've been here for 100 years. Actually, we're fixing up an old combine in the shop, me and my boys, and with my oldest son sitting on that seat, there'll be 5 generations of our family sitting on that combine seat. So we're very well established farm here, and that's all I really know. Dad's farmed cattle grain farm, and all through high school went into University of Manitoba, and just about that time was a little bit of a tough go at farming. The prices were low and commodities are pretty tough, and right through BSc there. It's just a really hard situation. And I was dating my wife at that time, and I was looking for something to provide. I was looking for something else to complement the farm, to provide some cash, maybe raise a family on. So I was looking, and I just happened to stumble upon this beekeeping course. It just was there. I took it 2 credits, bought 4 colonies, and then you know, how 4 turns to 8 turns into 30, then you lose them all, and then you buy back, and then you know, you know how that goes, ups and
Yeah.
downs like this. So we introduced bees to the farm, and I won't get into the details, but eventually my brothers, I have 3 brothers, and we all come back to the farm to form a company. And as we did that, we expanded the farm, increased the land base, increased the cattle. And because my one brother managed the grain farm, then my other brother managed the cattle farm, that opened up the opportunity for me to then complement a third aspect of the farm, which is the bees. So I I invested and I built the bee business into what I have right now. So we have a pretty busy operation going on here. Uh, you know, it's a lot of fun though, and bees have just become a major part of my life.
Yeah, I know. I follow it, and all the ups and downs is everything documented, and that's a lot of work too. And that's what I want to ask you. What was your motivation to start YouTube? You know, because I I started YouTube, and after start to post videos in a while, I start to develop this appreciation, you know, for people like you that expose yourself that way to give us so much. And I start to generate, you know, develop this appreciation for YouTubers. It's hard to explain. So I'm curious to know how you keep up with this because it's a lot of work. People might not know that.
Oh, it is a tremendous amount of work, and it's something I really enjoy. Excuse me, I just got to clear my throat. I've always kept a journal. I've always, you know, I'm a man of reflection, really. I keep a journal. I look back and what's happened. I look back a few years of what's happened, and it just helps me put things together to help me predict what's going to be coming at us, and you know how to approach things differently. So I've always kept a journal. Then I went online and I kept an online journal, and that seemed to open it up to people who were interested to be able to read this journal of mine and just keep tracks and tabs of the farm and treat it much the same way. The way I transitioned to YouTube is on a little bit of a different note. I'm kind of, you know, I'm the guy in the conference you see in the back room, you know, in the farthest back seat. Nobody will see you back there. Never made any noise. If I ever had a question, I'd stand up and I'd hardly be able to say it because I don't handle crowds very well. And it just happened. The BC Honey Producers Association approached me a few years back, and they had their keynote speaker fall ill to health problems. He said, Jeff Lee is actually a guy contacted me. He said, Ian, you got to get out here. You got to fill in my spot. Give me a hand here. I need you to speak in front of this crowd about everything you know. And I was like, no way, I'm not going to do that. Are you absolutely nuts? Yeah, I've never stood in front of a crowd in my life, and I'm not going to stand there in front of 300. And finally, he wore me down, and I said yes. And when I committed to that, um, basically, I panicked. I didn't know what I was going to do because I didn't know how to do it. So what I did was I took my phone and I just held it up like this because I wanted to see what I sounded like. And the first 7 shots I deleted because I couldn't stand the way I presented myself.
I completely understand
until
that.
I until I got one. And then I said, okay. So I corrected a few ticks and things like that. So it's just like a practice and just trying to correct my mannerisms in a way. And then I figured, well, the next step I have to do is put it online so people can see me. So I'm actually practicing in front of people if I'm going to do this. So I put it on YouTube just just as a matter of fact, exactly for that reason. And I formed my YouTube channel. So I did a little bit of practicing speaking there, went to Kelowna, did all right, you know, got a lot of good feedback. And then when I come back from that convention, I just kept up my YouTube channel and, you know, here we go right now. So it's been quite the journey, I tell you. My like YouTube you mentioned is a lot of work, and that is very true. It can be very demanding, especially when it starts forming into a little bit of a business, and it's like a whip, just like the farm. You know, you got the farm, it's whipping you every day to keep going, keep making money, keep progressing, keep building. YouTube does that same thing, and I'm not sure if you see that too, Humberto, but it just pushes you and drives you to try to do more and more and more. And you know, every time it does that, I just push back on YouTube and say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to follow my own rules here. I'm here for my own reasons. And that's to keep a journal of everything I do and just help reflect on everything that's happened with me And in a sense, I like to tell guys, it's me. I'm talking to myself 15 years ago, trying to tell me 15 years ago what I should be doing, because I needed guidance back there. And maybe that's a little bit of the spirit people are tapping into when they're watching my channel, is just me speaking to myself, which in a way maybe translates to them, because they'd be looking through they're looking for that same perspective, that perspective of somebody who's gone through all those challenges, and how do you manage those challenges. As you're scaling up in your business, you start encountering different situations, and how do you approach those situations. And everybody wants to see success, but they also want to see failure. They want to see honesty to the situation, because that's what they're looking for. They're looking for perspective. They're not looking for a sugar coat. So it's basically, that's what I do. I just put it out there. If I'm having a good day, the sun's shining, the bees are flying, making honey, I'm in a good mood. But then when it's cold and snowing, the bees are, grumpy, I reflect much the same way.
Oh yeah.
So it's just the way it is.
Documented. It's documented. We know that.
It's just a very raw nature of it. I found myself, one thing I noticed about your job on YouTube is you do a really good production. You must be skilled in that manner, because the videos you put out there are very well scripted, shot. I mean, it's very attractive photography, and the way you put things together, I really admire. I tried doing that. I tried putting a little bit of effort into my videos, and my email is flooded with beekeepers saying, "Stop it! I don't want that." Okay, my audience calls, so
the audience is the boss. Yeah,
I just put it up there, and that's basically what I do. So
I still experimenting. I like to try to put the effort to make it more visually appealing, because especially when you're doing with science, my goal is to make it easier to understand, perhaps. So I try to use other means to help in this process. But I think it's still experimenting. I don't know where this is going to go. But I understand there is a lot of work because at the beginning, at least, took me 1 or 2 months to produce a video, and that time you already published 105. So,
yeah, but it's quality scale too, right? Like, I'm just boom, 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 putting them out like that just because that's my daily life. I'm at the same time, I'm editing, because I'm trying to improve myself with my speaking etiquette, correcting all my tics. Like, I go to Toastmasters. I do a lot of work at this, and I've corrected a lot of them. But as soon as you correct one, there's another one that creeps up. So you just a continual progression of learning how to speak properly, how to convey to people that communicate like this. Online, this is a totally different medium. Like, we can get into that later. But speaking in front of a crowd where you have all that feedback coming back at you, and using that feedback as you're presenting, as compared to speaking online here in front of a screen where you have zero feedback except for you looking back at me.
Yeah,
it's two different things here. It's going on all at the same time, and I'm practicing in one dimension here, and then I go and stand in front of a crowd in another dimension. So it's just a huge learning experience for me, and I'm just having the time of my life. I tell you, I should be going down to Tennessee here in the new year, and my wife was going to come with me, but she can't for health reasons. But I'm going to be standing in front of 900 people down there, and I don't know how I'm going to do that. But
wow.
I'm just going to stand up in front of the crowd and just
Just go with automatic. Yeah, you know what you're doing.
Flow.
Just pretend there's a big camera in front of you and just go.
I told Cayman to put the lights on bright so I can't see anybody.
So you can't see anybody. Yeah.
But if I would have told you that 4 years ago, I would have told you you're nuts. And maybe that just taps a little bit into my character a bit, where I'm always looking to improve. I'm always testing the boundaries. Like, maybe you'll see that with my bee management. I'm always trying to figure out what's going on within my hives. Like, I'm looking at them, I'm seeing performing these amazing things, and how are they doing that? And I'm seeing them react certain ways with other situations being influenced. We just went through a 150-year drought here, just extreme heat. And I don't know where that honey come from. like they got it from somewhere, and they set up these nests just masterfully. And here I am trying to manage around all these conditions to help them along. And I'm wondering, well, am I helping them or am not helping them? Like, what is my role here? So I'm always trying to poke and prod the hives and understand them a little bit better, just to help my management to be able to, extract more honey, make more money. But it's just continually pressing the boundaries all the time to be able to make them do what I want them to do. And maybe I reflect that back in myself a little bit too. I can see a place where I need to improve, and so I just press myself a little bit further to try to improve myself there. And it's just a continuation of progression as we go forward, and it just takes you on quite the journey.
Yeah, and that's go straight to the one of the points of the conversation that I want to go, and one of the reasons why I also wait so much to put you first, because I followed you, and at least I have a feeling that I understand your philosophy in beekeeping a little bit, because you talk so much, and sometimes you're talking to yourself. I can see you're just expressing your ideas. You're brainstorming in front of the internet, and I think that's fascinating, because I can see where you want to go, or your questions, and the beauty behind, and your joy. It is That's why I like to watch you in your channel. So eh, eh, that being said, I want to ask a little other things about your property, because I have questions looking at your videos. Do you have your bees have contact with other beekeepers, about other bees? There is overlaps around, or you have a big area that's just yours?
Yeah, a little bit of both. Maybe not near the bee pressure some places have in the States. I know with migratory beekeeping, there's a lot of movement of hives down, in the almonds, and they come up into the Dakotas, and then they go down to Texas, and it's just kind of this great big movement of bees, and the guys are jockeying over yards all the time and semi-loads, and we're not quite like that up here. We have more of a smaller scale type territory. So we have gentleman agreements between beekeepers, and we mark out our areas, but we do rub our elbows with our neighbors. And I have sharp shoulders, and I'm pushing him this way, and he's pushing back, and he pushes, and I push back, and he, every time I drive by his yard, I'm shaking my fist. So we still have that uh, territory dispute with everybody, but it's not a lot of pressure. But our farm has also been here for 100 years, like I was saying. So we have a lot of land here that I can, claim as my own, and then form my core. And we know all the neighbors around, so they all want to support my efforts because I'm part of the community, and I hire kids from the school, and my kids go to the school. So they just open up the territory to allow me to maintain that myself. So I'm kind of exclusively. I have 200 square acres, 200 square miles of apiary here, and then there's beekeepers all the way around me all the same. Yeah, not a lot of pressure though.
But there is no much pressure. That's my understanding. So you
Yeah,
have a big piece of land that you're kind of have your own space.
yeah, even the landowners that I don't keep bees on, I still give them a bit of honey just so they hold that territory for me.
I
So
know how it works. Yeah.
yeah, I keep I like to keep about 2 miles around my yards, and then I try to stack my yards all within a grid within my map, so it works very well. So I go about 15 miles that way, 20 miles that way, 10 miles that way, and 10 miles that way. So it works out very well, and very diverse landscape too. We have. I don't know if you know of ancient Lake Agassiz, but it's an ancient
Yeah.
lake that used to be in the middle of North America here, and it's created a real flatland farming. Lake bottom is what it is, and Miami's just at the base of the shore. So the escarpment goes up. It's about a 200-foot elevation, and our farm is right at the top of that escarpment. So we're up in the hills, so more ravine and hills and such. So there's that type of topography on the other side. So we're very conservation-minded farmers because we're managing heavy land at the bottom, and we're managing hills and erosion issues up top. And we manage all types of land through our farm. So whatever we can't grain farm, we switch into pasture, and whatever we can't pasture, we retain as virgin land, like virgin bush, untouched. And we're always trying to minimize the risks of erosion and everything like that. And then the bees just kind of bring another layer into our whole philosophy of conservation within the farm, because now it's allowed us a channel into that that the conservation of preserving pollinators and preserving diversity. And we're not just trying to protect the soils and manage the soils appropriately so we can grow our crops better. We're trying to manage the landscape altogether, including the diversity aspects of it, which directly contribute to the protection of pollinators and everything else living. So it just it's added another perspective into our farm, which is extremely unique. And I think that takes a lot of interest with beekeepers and farmers actually around us.
Yeah, I like the way you manage your bees. When I visit beekeepers and I do my consulting and help other beekeepers to optimize their operation or work with companies, I always be sometimes thinking about your philosophy and and you have a scientific philosophy. I would say you always testing, you always adapting, you always observing, and that's what I want to talk to you. And one of the reasons why I want to bring you first, because my channel is about research, is about bees and more in a scientific perspective, and you have that. Even maybe if you're gonna say no, but I follow. You have your own experiments, you have your way to do your experiments, and I and appreciate that. And I think that's one of the reasons why you're being successful, because you're always testing, you're always learning. And can you tell me a little bit more about your philosophy to do your own research, your tests, how you do your tests and how you feel comfortable about them, that kind of thing? Because I know it's hard, because it's very limited amount of time and people. So how you deal with that?
And that's something I appreciate with your channel here, Humberto, is it's kind of the same philosophy I believe in. Um, Science is all about information, right? The more information we have at our fingertips, the better decisions we can make. And just because we have information on one hand doesn't make that true. You know, if we have more information on that one hand than the other, then that makes it more true. So we just got to be able to find which information makes the most sense in what we're trying to do. So we just have to keep asking ourselves questions. And I don't think we should be afraid of acknowledging that we don't know the answer, especially with bees.
Oh yeah.
Like, I haven't a clue what's going on half the time. Maybe I pretend like I know what's going on, but I'm scrambling half the time to just try to keep up to them, trying to react to them, and try to predict the situation going on so I can actually feel useful in the apiary there as I'm managing those hives. But one of the reasons why I focus on trying to do these little trials, these little farmer trials. I know they're not very uh, they're riddled with errors. I realize that, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to decide whether or not my actions within the yards are actually beneficial, or are they just feel good activities, right? And we're spending a lot of money on some of these things, and we have to make sure that what we're doing is actually translating into benefit, is actually helping us forward and not providing a detriment. So it's just, testing the boundaries that way, just to make sure. Like, one example maybe is I'm always figuring out whether or not feeding supplement is actually providing benefit or not. And I've pretty much come to the conclusion now that it's absolutely beneficial for my bees. But I've formed this opinion over the last, for sure over the last 5 years, but then even further back in the last 10 years. And there's a lot of beekeepers still that will say that supplement doesn't provide benefit to their bees. So you got to kind of ask the question, why is there such variation in beekeepers' opinions on this, when some beekeepers will swear by it and spend tens of thousands of dollars on this stuff, and employ workers to get this stuff into their hives, and others won't even look at supplement, and everybody seems to be doing well. But there's different situations going on in different places all at the same time, and those different situations directly influence what's going on within our hives. So the approach I'm trying to take with my apiary is just trying to find out what those situations are, and focusing on all the negative aspects to help develop my hives along in the most progressive state I can. So I found feeding supplement really helps with that, especially up here in Canada. In the spring, we have very variable weather. It's warm, and the bees will bring in pollen and nectar, and they're just going like crazy. And they're almost developing their nests out hand to mouth, and then we'll get a cold snap come in and just put them in an instant dearth, and then they kind of snaps them back into a protein stress as they're trying to react to to the lack of nutrients coming in, and that that puts them in distress and opens themselves up to opportunity. So I found by feeding supplements, it has provided steady progression in my hives all the way through. But it wasn't night and day when I started. I did an intensive trial when I actually went in and counted the frames, 3 different yards. I had a trial of 200 hives going on with 3 different yards. I went and counted the frames every 3 weeks of bees just to try to map out whether or not the yard with no supplement on there did any better or any worse than the yard that I spent all this money and time with supplement on there. And that first year, I didn't see a lot of difference. I was like, oh, okay, here we go. So I started almost adjusting my management practice backwards, thinking, maybe this is just a feel good activity. What is actually in this patty that's actually going to provide benefit and all this,
Yeah,
so
where
questioning
is the
myself.
return
But
of investment?
but the next spring that come through, it is very cold and slow spring. Those bees I didn't feed supplement to absolutely fell apart to the point where they struggled to get through that spring into summer. The yard that I fed supplement in, it was night and day. And I was like, oh, there we go. There's more information, different conditions, different circumstances. My efforts were here, and my efforts were put in to achieve a very specific purpose. And that is just to provide that steady nutrition to help those bees develop out their brood nest, to continue on the development of that nest. So now when I'm feeding my supplement, I'm looking at the conditions. I'm looking at, okay, there's a lot of pollen coming in. These guys don't need this. So we pull back a little bit, and all of a sudden it gets cold, or maybe I'm looking in the nest, I'm not seeing a lot of reserves. Then we start putting a little protein on there just to protect them, to make sure that if we do have any eruptions, that they're able to maintain themselves. So we're very, very specific with the way we feed them. And then I'm also translating this into the fall now too, where we're seeing maybe a lack of a diversity across the countryside with the land being developed and such. We don't have as much pollen coming in, and I'm seeing a benefit now as opposed to maybe earlier where I'm giving them a slap of protein right after those honey boxes come off to build up these winter nests, complement that little bit of pollen coming in just to help gear that nest into winter. And it seems to be working. And you can kind of see that in my sheds right now. So
Yeah, and I follow you, and I follow your struggle. I remember I would say it's a struggle for you to understand what's going on, and you're always, is protein patties good or bad? It's good or bad. I remember this whole path that you follow. So today you're more towards that works, right? So
yeah. And then last spring, I even took it a little bit further. I was like, well, we're putting all this time and energy into feeding these supplements, getting these patties on these colonies first thing out of the shed. And that's a lot of work. You got to crack the boxes, you interrupt the bees. It's cold usually, and you got to scrape a little spot for the patty and put it on and close it up. It takes a lot of time. It takes us a week to get away around the whole apiary to get these patties on, and we push and push and push to get them out. So I start thinking to myself, am I just fooling myself? What if we put dry feed out, and I mixed the dry feed in, so there's dry fats in there too. So I tried to mimic exactly what is in these patties. So they had the fats, they had the proteins, they had all the other micros and the vitamins and everything in this dry feed. There's a cornmeal that I put out. If maybe they'll bring in the same amount of that and satisfy the requirements for the first 3 weeks of their development to when we can actually get around with patties. So I tried that, and they absolutely devoured it. They brought in more of that dry stuff than they actually consumed a patty. But what I did is I run trials again. I run yards with the dry stuff only, no patties, and then the yards with the dry stuff with patties, and then just the patties alone. And what happened that spring was the bees, they got very active, and they brought in a whole bunch of feed, and they started brooding up really heavy. Everything looked good, and then it turned cold again. And after that cold spell went through, I went and assessed my hives to see the difference between the two. And the hives that are just on the dry stuff, they ramped up their brood production, and you could see that because we had about a frame and a half of brood, but then there's nothing else, and then eggs. So they're very interrupted development within that nest. The one when I didn't have uh, the dry open feed, but just the patties, had like 3 frames of brood and all this developed larvae and everything around it. And I'm like, yeah, well, of course, because there's an interruption of protein coming in at that time. This provided the protein at all times. So the patties did a lot better. So that what I'm trying to say is that told me that my uh, thought process was wrong.
Well,
And I had to lean back onto, putting the back work into my hives, getting those patties out first thing, because what they need is they need that protein on to protect the development of their nest. But I can't tell that if I don't run controls. So more, like I say, more information at hand just helps me guide my way further.
so but that, for you to reach your conclusion about the patties took you a couple years, I would say. You have experiments that works, you have experiments that you were not sure about it. So it was a long time. How long would you say to me?
Well, I've been
To be like today, like you are very confident that patties work for you.
Yeah, I'm very confident. Actually, next spring you'll likely see me running trials again. But it's probably been like 5 years of real intensive looking to see what the situation is here, and now I'm come to the conclusion that it's a no brainer. I'm just gonna, we're gonna bend over, crack the hives, put patties in first thing out of the shed. So that's what we'll do. We're gonna provide the dry stuff all at the same time, but we're gonna make sure we have that protein on top first thing out of the shed.
Yeah, it was funny that you brought that up because I told you that I'm gonna have a surprise to you today.
I love
because
surprises.
because I know and I follow you. I know your struggles, and I'm working on a project that I want to pick up your brain because I'm gonna concentrate this next year. My videos is gonna be a lot of nutrition, a lot of research about nutrition. And because I follow you and I know how you do your things and you have questions, and I always collecting this paper. Oh, this is for young. This is another one for young. And I was just, and so I want to share the screen here because you're the first one. Did you know that scientists today, they're not sure if it works or not? So we have several years of research and we still not conclude if it's work or not. And I want to go the whole path and try to explain to people how the things work and what we know so far and what can we do together. They're going to give you more information so you can try things out. So let me share the screen here. Okay, so this is a very recent publication from Emily. When I was at University of Florida working with Dr. Jamie Ellis, Emily was a master student, a very talented young scientist, and she did a whole review of all the studies that regarding nutrition and supplementation, pollen supplementation to honeybees. So she was trying to find out what was going on. So there is this article. I think this is gonna be recorded here in YouTube. So this is the address where you can find it. It's open source. Everybody have access to. But I'm gonna be working on videos the whole year about all this whole problem here. But what I want to address here, because they have a table that I want to show you. There is this table they publish, which is a summary of all the 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 studies and what worked and what didn't work. And I want to show you and see your reaction because I think that'll be interesting. For example, uh, there is when they're looking at adult population, the metrics was to quantify adult population with or without supplementation, and they found 18 studies showing that there was a positive correlation. They found positivity on that. There were seven different studies. They didn't find any differences between the bees. And there is three studies that they didn't have enough controls, so they didn't consider the articles very much. But they put here in the table like exactly what was the recipes. And I know you like your recipes. I don't know if you
I'm not going to give out my recipe though.
I know. I'm not asking. I'm not asking. This is very secrets, beekeepers. Beekeepers like to
I
keep
can
their
brush on,
recipes.
yeah, I can brush on it a little bit, but there's some
No, no,
things,
no. I'm
yeah.
not. I'm not asking you that. No, no, no. Don't worry about. So I'll just give you information. That's my job here. Look, so all the everything they have tried and all the references are here. So I think that's gonna be good information for you. I think you're gonna enjoy that kind of information. So I'm also gonna leave a link so people can see. And guys at home, I know we're not interacting very much, but if you have questions, please leave a question here so I can perhaps take a look and maybe if you can answer some questions.
Yeah, the real secret with making these patties is to make something that's off the shelf and cheap. Like we don't want to be spending a
Yeah,
lot of money on this, and something that the bees will eat too. Like they're fussy little buggers. They, you put something on there, they'll throw it out the front. You're like, oh, I just spent a lot of time making that.
yeah, and
So
money. Yeah.
yeah, and money. So and we want to try to think that what they're ingesting is then converting into jelly to be to feed to the bees, and not just ingesting to send it out as a fly. So some of the things that a lot of these mixes will have, you'll see, is soy flour. They seem to love to eat soy flour.
So you do you
Brewer's
have
yeast.
you have good experience with soy flour?
I don't use it anymore. No, just because it's not balanced right. And you got to, and there's problems with soy flour, but we do use brewer's yeast. Brewers, it has like vitamins in it. There, it's pretty good, and it's got lots of nutrients in brewer's yeast, so that's good. I've been on a cornmeal kick. I'm a grain farmer, so I'm partial to corn because corn is just part of our farm, and they're always in the feed bunks in the cattle yard bothering the animals in the spring. So, well, if they want to eat it, so I'm going to give it to them. So this last year we took cornmeal. I forget the protein on it, but it is pretty high, and we ground it up. And I had problems because my when I ground it into flour, it wasn't grinding it fine enough, and we
Fine
got to get
enough?
it. Yeah, it's got to be I think 40 microns. So had to send it through twice just to get like over 75% of the stuff under 40 microns. Otherwise, they just kick it out the front. But then I made this patty up with that, and I added a little bit of brewer's yeast to make it in a dough consistency, and we dump a lot of sugar in there to attract them to that. And then we add some oils just to help balance out their lipids and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, it's just a big question whether or not it's actually translating into the brood nest or not. But what one thing that I'm doing is when I'm seeing them consume it, I'm watching them consume it at certain times. Like they'll eat anything. You put a banana up on top, they'll consume it. You put a bag of wood shavings, almost looks like they're consuming that. They're just discarding it. So when the nest is developing, and when they're on a little bit of stress, let's say they're hand to mouth building this massive spring nest, because these bees go crazy in the spring when they're starting to build their nest. They got this fresh pollen coming in, the nectar, and it's warm. These bees have very little resource inside, but like 3 to 4 frames of brood just cooking along, and streams of pollen coming in. You're wondering, holy crap. So then I get patty up on top, and they don't pay a lot of attention to it until we have some cold weather come through or rain. And then you see him just go right up in top, and you see him eating it. So that almost tells you that the bees have a demand of protein or demand of fats or whatever, and they're finding it up here now, and they're bringing it down there. So when we're feeding these products, we just kind of watch them eat it, and if it looks like they're translating it down there, and they probably are, and if it looks like they're taking it and throwing it out the front, then that's probably what they're doing too,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, that was a question, a scientific question. People didn't have a answer until last year. Actually, let me show you here. There is this publication that they trace the fate of the pollen substitute. They dye the pollen substitute. Let me see if I can get the PDF here.
Well, that's an interesting approach.
So so I want to show just to make conclusion, because I'm gonna make videos about the whole how they did it, and it's some of the procedures are kind of complicated. But what is it? Our data suggests that one, a proportion of adult bees ingest the patties. So they were able to see the patty inside and the cells and the gut. So there was consumption.
Okay.
And I remember you have this question in your mind: Are they consuming this or throwing away? Blah blah blah. That's a scientific question that we have for a long time, and finally we're getting some answers here. Number two, adult bees likely do not feed patties directly to larvae. Apparently, they stalk first, and something happened there. They need to be processed, or I don't know, need to do some work done on the patty before they they use it to give it to the larvae. Number three, adult bees do not store patties like bee bread. I'm gonna have to explain that in a video, but and number four, only a very small portion of patty is lost as debris. So good. So we're not losing your money. It's going somewhere there. So, so that kind of studies that are going to start to focus for the next year. A lot of nutrition, a lot of the things based on the videos that you create. So that's why I want you here first, because I want to tell that to the people that I'm accumulating all these questions that you are, with your philosophy and your brainstorming to all of us. And I'm making notes. I got this one. I got this one.
Yeah, and that's really important because as beekeepers, we need to know how the bees are using this product. And then if we know how they're using the product, we can focus on its efficiencies of the feeding and maybe just understand whether we need to be feeding or not. Like if I have yards that have lots of pollen around and they have enough that they're able to, hold reserve within the nest. I'm wasting my time putting patties up there because they have what they need in there, right? So there's, when I did my little trial there earlier on, when the feeding patties and no feeding patties, that's one of the situations was probably going on within one of the yards is they had good access to pollen, and it just there is no difference between the negative control and the control because it was all coming in anyways, and they didn't need. But as soon as there was a little bit of stress and shortage and really tough conditions, then that patty filled in a place, filled in that deficit. Beekeepers need to be able to identify those deficits and then fill in that problem to help relieve it. So that's where I see our jobs as beekeepers is just helping, drop all those bolts in the cogs just to make sure that everything kind of flows through a lot easier. And in a way, I guess that's my overall operating strategy. Like I get a lot of question from beekeepers and, you're a grain farmer, you're spraying for bugs. You're growing corn and sunflowers and canola and you're using seed treatments and that's all killing the bees. How come they're not killing your bees? Well, I think it's because I'm focusing so much on keeping a healthier hive, keeping my hives well nourished, that they're not stressed. And when an animal's not stressed, they don't fall to stressors a lot easier. Just like any other animal, you have a sickly cow, they're going to come down with infection a lot easier if it was a cow was healthy. So I'm just trying to translate that into my nests. But you can't see when you look at a bee, you can't tell if that bee is healthy or not, right? Or well nourished. It looks like a bee, same as the other bee beside it. One's well malnourished, the other one's very healthy and vigorous. You can't see that, so we have to. So that, I guess what I'm saying is what I try to do is I try to focus my efforts of management to make sure that I know those are healthy bees, and nutrition is a very important part of that whole puzzle.
Yeah, so let me go back here to the table because this is just 1% of the table. So this is the just look adult population, and then there are other studies. Brood development didn't have enough control, so they just one paper from 2012. Brood production, there is 21 articles. There was a positive result regarding supplementation. 9 studies show up, no results at all. There is no differences between the negative controls and the positive controls, and 39 studies didn't have proper controls, meaning people wasting research money for, I don't know who's giving this money to these people, but that's okay. And look at how many studies, and I thought, I think Ian's gonna like to see this. And all the recipes here, everything they try.
Yeah, like you said, 18 positive. So that weights the benefits heavier than
Yes,
the
yes,
non-benefits, right? So that just helps
yes.
us make clear decisions. And it doesn't say that's going to translate every time, obviously, because that's what that's showing also. There's all these things going on all at the same time, all these dynamics going on within the nest itself. But what's going on within this nest is directly related to what's going on outside the nest. And, most of the time we can't see those dynamics that are outside the nest that's then transferring inside. And it's just that's what makes beekeeping so interesting for me, is that direct connection it gives us to that natural world. And, you can kind of read what's going on out there in the hive here, but you see what's going on within the hive here, and that's already happened like 3 weeks ago almost. You're almost looking back in time. So then you look at see what's happened, and you try to correlate that to what was the conditions at that time. Then you start looking at what's going on right now, and then you start predicting what's going to happen within that nest. And then you layer your management to try to predict what's going to happen to make sure that the bees act the way you want them to act. And
Yeah,
it's just a completely fascinating thing. It's one of the reasons why I'm still a beekeeper. And I mean, it's hot in the yards, and I get stung, and it's a pretty tough business. Middle of August, I start getting robby, and I start hating these little bees. But the pure interest of what's going on within those nests, just the spectacular nature of honeybees, is what just keeps drawing me back into them. So that's, I think a lot of beekeepers would tell you the same thing.
yeah. You become part of the system. You become the sensor. You start to sense like the bees, and you just help them with whatever you have. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Let me go back here because I was gonna continue all the recipes for you here. I'll send that to you.
Yeah,
Like,
send that to me. I'd like to read it. I have a guy out in New Brunswick who he just indulges me with all these crazy ideas, and I'm his little guinea pig, I think, because I test out all his little ideas. So I'm all about this.
yeah, I know. So yeah, that's why I want to bring that to you. Poly collection and storage. There is 8 studies with positive, 9 neutral, and 1 negative. So pollen collection and supplementation are not going too well regarding the science behind, but all the recipes are here. Royal jelly, no results. I
I
don't.
did a little trial in royal jelly in my builders because I
Hmm.
wanted to think that my patty that I was mixing up was providing a tremendous amount of benefit to the builders themselves. And so I ran a trial, which I blocked off the front so no pollen could get in. So they're just on the patty alone. Then I had one that was allowing pollen to come in, naturally. And then I had one blocked off, so no pollen coming in and no patty on there. So I was just relying on the reserves of the bees itself. And obviously the one with the pollen coming in was the better one. The one with the patty, come behind there that was kicking along, and the one that had trapped off, so there's no inflow of pollen and no patty on top, obviously didn't produce as much because there wasn't as much jelly production. But right at the end of that trial, those bees were, they were getting old. There wasn't a lot of bees left in those builders. And I run it one more time, and I put my graft frames in there, and that builder with old bees that hadn't been any inflow of pollen or any patty on top outperformed those other two right at the very end of that trial. And I was like, what just happened? you know,
Beekeeping, beekeeping.
beekeeping.
Yeah, beekeeping. Yeah, I know, I know. So I'll continue here because I told you there was 1%, and this is material for videos for 10 years. I would say it's 10 years of videos for me here. Worker bee longevity. 23 positive studies, 5 negatives, and 1 no result. And again, all the recipes here.
That's an important one, especially up here. Like we have 5.5
Yeah,
months that we're confining them. So we're focusing on fortifying their diet to be able to provide the nutrients, fatten them up is kind of the way we look at it up here. Just get the fat in their bones so they can get themselves through winter.
yeah. That's the other part that you like a lot, the pests and pathogens. Your philosophy, nutrition, take care of the pests, right? So look at those black queen cell virus. There is with B Pro and Mega B. Apparently, black queen cell virus go up in two studies here. There was a negative effect with these two supplementations here. I'll bring how they did so we can get conclusions together with videos. It's gonna be fun. Next year is gonna be fun. So deformed wing virus. There is one showing the positive. There is a positive effect. And Mega B apparently decrease the amount of deformed wing virus. I need to check how they did. So I just want to let you know there is a lot of fun we're gonna have next year, and I want to pick your brain every time I'm gonna be doing these videos and to correlate with your tests because I know the way you do things over there. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, the only one I've done there that I saw noticed a difference is the nosema. Like I'm always looking at these levels all the
Yeah,
time. I can't get rid of black cell queen virus. It's like a lingering infection. It's
yeah.
always there. And I'm finding sac brood being the same thing. It's just something that it doesn't matter year after year. It's just a background level, that stuff back there. And I'm not sure what to make of sac brood virus. But deformed wing virus is one of those things that fluctuates quite a bit and is, obviously it's directly to the varroa mite. But I control my mites and I don't, and I'm watching all the time and I don't have these huge explosions, but that deformed wing virus still seems to fluctuate up and down like this, even without mites within the colonies. So it's something that I don't understand. And actually, the first time that I've kept bees, I've been keeping bees for 22 years now, and I've only been keeping track of deformed wing virus for the last 10. But this is the first time that I put my bees into the shed this year with zero deformed wing virus copies being present within my samples, and I don't know why, because I
Wow.
had varroa mites in my hives this
Yeah,
fall.
that's surprising.
Yeah, I couldn't make that correlation. But the one with nosema, um, I've always had trouble with nosema. It's just been a plague. And I've actually had, like, I've very rarely do I have my hives test under 5 million spore count. And I've had, test my bees in the shed up to 75 million spore counts. It's just been and I think and it's all Nosema serrana. And it's something that it's not very visible. It's just, it shows up in a way where the colony just suffers and just kind of dwindles in the spring. That's the way I can tell is Nosema serrana. I see the colony that
I'm concerned about Nosema, and I think you and another beekeeper in Florida that I know are concerned about Nosema. Everybody else doesn't care about Nosema, and I think this is a big, big mistake.
it is, and it's invisible. And I don't think people, just because they can't see it, doesn't mean it's not happening. But
Yeah,
it's in there. And even though we can't really do a lot about it, like I have a neighbor who doesn't even know how to spell Nosema because he just doesn't pay attention to it. But it doesn't mean that it's not a problem. And maybe it's not a problem on its own, but maybe it's compounding itself with other situations, like maybe with sac brood. Maybe it's, interacting
yeah.
negatively there, or black cell queen virus. I know maybe with higher levels of Nosema, you have more expression of black cell queen virus, which leads into the problem within builders. So when we start getting issues with black cell queen virus, we relate it to Nosema. We cut those builders out immediately because we can't manage it. Anyways, what I was saying, it was the Nosema. I did these trials with a product, and I'm not going to name products, but I had a trial with products that would control the Nosema. And it kind of worked and it didn't work. And with my trials, it was all inconsistent, up and down, and nothing really correlated to the treatment and non-treatment, except when I started feeding heavily with protein supplement. As soon as I started feeding my bees protein, my nosema counts, they didn't, fall off the paper, but they become predictable within my trials. And all the trials that I had feeding my bees to increase their health did better. And not just the bees, not just the hives, but also the queens. I had a lot less queen losses also. So I directly attribute that to maybe the product was killing the guts within the bees, and the bees weren't able to then counteract some of the other negative situations going on in there, or maybe it just allowed the opportunity for the nosema to express itself worse. And then that's where you find all the variation. Whereas when you're focusing on nutrition, you're keeping a healthy bee, healthy gut, and maybe they're able to handle themselves a little bit better. So that, that take that for what it's worth. It's just another farmer trial, right? But just seeing correlations with activities that we're doing within the hives, and that's the important part. Just the actions we're doing. Are we watching to make sure they're doing what we want them to do? And if they are, then just carry forward with that and try to figure out why. But if not, then we got to get onto a different bus, right, and figure things out a little differently.
Yeah, that's why I appreciate your philosophy. Your always testing is always very entertaining to me, and I learn a lot, and to see the way the beekeepers are trying to do private research in their own operation. A lot of people are asking about the paper. Just let me just put in the chat. I think you guys can. I'm gonna Control C. Let's see if I can do this.
I was talking to a beekeeper last night on a video chat like this, and he was asking about small hive beetle. And we don't have small hive beetle up here. It's just the conditions don't warrant it. But he's down in Georgia or Alabama. I get all the states mixed up down there. Alabama. He's from Alabama,
Alabama.
and just trouble with small hive beetle. So he's asking the group, how do you guys manage this? Is just having huge problems, and he's going to figure it out, even though he doesn't have the answers now. He's going to figure it out, because if he doesn't figure it out, he's going to be out of business, right? So he has a drive to figure that problem out. Otherwise, he's going to be looking for another job. And that's what makes farmers so resilient and so unique, because we are driven to find those answers, and we will find them no matter what, right? Yeah.
There is no other alternative. The alternative is
Going broke, right?
yeah, go out of business.
Yeah, so we have a drive behind us to figure out our own situations, and that's why we're always doing these little tests and trials, just to make sure that what we're doing actually works. And if it works, we just keep at it. And it's real sloppy science, but in a way it still is science, because we're still finding outcomes, and we're following the positive outcomes to solve those issues.
Yeah, that's the resilience of farmers. Yeah, every farmers that I go, we have similar attitudes. And we have conversations. My father was a beekeeper. I'm a second generation, but it was a small operation, not like yours. But in Brazil, it's more. We didn't have machines too much. Everything was more, with with our arms,
And your
and
back.
just create and back, and just create a different. It's a different environment. It's hard to explain for people that never have to pass through this. And when I got here, especially, I sometimes I tell the stories. I feel like my father and my mom in today's world, they're probably gonna be in jail the way they treat me, or or something.
Oh, it probably made you a better man, I'd say.
Yeah, it worked out. I would say
Yeah.
it worked out, and people just shocked. They said, "Well, I wasn't a good boy."
Maybe, and then there's nothing wrong with that. Like, farmers are, well, to a point, but farmers are a little bit rough, very independent. Uh, and that's just the way we are, because we're down on the ground, we're in the trenches, we're trying to figure these problems out. We see the good, we see the bad, we deal with the ugly. We just get through, and we get
Yeah,
through. Our objective is to get through into that next year. Like this last drought we just got through, it was some I've never
too
seen.
much.
Oh, I never want to see a year like that again. It was hot, it was dry, and the smoke. All of Western Canada was on smoke, and just trying to not only manage my hives to get them through to the condition I have them now. Like, we put a lot of effort into these colonies to make sure they were good going into winter. But my crew, trying to work guys to help me get all this work done when it's 35 degrees every day, breathing smoke, heavy in the lungs, just exhausted. How do you keep things moving forward in really tough situations like that? And it just forms that uh, attitude towards, we're the ones down here doing all the work. screw you guys for telling me how to do my job kind of deal. Like you'll get that
Yeah,
attitude
yeah,
from
yeah.
farmers because we're down there and we have to survive. And then we hate when other people press down on top of us. But, we could maybe lighten up a little bit at certain times because we need input from the guy up top sometimes. But at the same time, I think the guy up top isn't listening like they should to the guy at the bottom doing the work and getting things done.
And that's something that I saw in university that it was always funny. Some students go, we send them to the farmers, and they come back like shocked, and like or crying or something. So just,
Yeah.
oh, sorry that. Because this is what happened when now with this whole buzz about bees. A lot of people got interested in bees, and everybody gonna be in the beekeeping, but when the reality knocked the door is a different thing. Yeah, let me see if we can get some questions. I think a lot of things going on in the chat, and I'm not following very much because I'm paying attention on you guys. If you have questions, now is the time, because I don't know if I can go back and look all the questions. So if you can write it down again, that would be great. Let me see if I can get some questions here. And Ian, if you have jokes, so you can tell jokes now.
Oh, no, the only joke I know I'm not going to tell.
Uh-oh.
So you come from Brazil then, Herberto, then, and you had bees back there. How big was the honey farm?
We have around maximum that we got were 50 something.
Okay.
We can't get much more than that without the machines. It start to get too intense. It's just me and my dad, and my dad, just me, my dad, my dad.
Oh, there's something I wanted to ask you right off the start, but I kind of got sidetracked. I kind of want to know a little bit about you. I know you worked for the USDA when you come up, right? Is that right?
Yeah, that's the way I'm working on a video about that too, because the
Oh,
story is
good.
very interesting. Because the way I got United States were when CCD was on top,
Yeah.
2006. The USDA was looking for a virologist, and I'm a virologist. That's
Okay.
what I was at a medical school at the time, finished my PhD doing vaccines against uh, a, a close related virus, like Israeli acute paralysis virus, IAPV.
Yeah. Yeah.
There
That
is
was the
a
main. That was the main focus at that time, right?
Yeah, and at that time I was working with a cousin, the human version of that virus in my PhD.
Oh.
So USDA was looking for somebody that have knowledge about that family of virus, and also have a beekeeping background. And apparently I was the only guy on the planet that time. So
Well, that's good. So was that Florida then? You worked in the University of Florida?
no, that was I go straight to Maryland, where I am right now,
Oh.
in Beltsville lab. So I was at the Beltsville lab in Maryland. So
Oh, I see. Okay.
then I spent 4 years here, and then I moved to North Carolina for 2 years, the University of North Carolina in Greensboro. I worked for the Army there. The Army also has a bee lab.
Oh, yeah.
To
So where is, you have to excuse me, where is Maryland? Oh, there it is. Yeah, right by
it,
Washington there, right?
that's why I was looking, because it's cold here. That's why I was looking for information.
Yeah, speaking of cold, it's going to be a cold Christmas. It's going to be minus 25, I think she said. So it's going to be,
Minus
we have,
25. All right.
yeah, Celsius. Yeah, we use a different scale, but we've had snow, so it's going to be a white Christmas. It's actually quite picturesque out here right now. Nice and cold.
Okay, I found a question for you. Yeah. Boom. Amy Musanti. Hey, Amy. Have you ever used glacial acidic acid to rid your comb of Nosema spores?
No, I've never used any type of treatment on my combs. That maybe it could be something I should look into, but I've never. I don't even know how to approach that because I have 10,000, 15,000 boxes. I don't exactly know how to achieve that, and especially when there's bees in the boxes. You'd almost have to cycle the bees out of the boxes through dead out equipment, I guess, to cycle them through some type of treatment like that. But and I don't even call combs when I fear that the colony's fallen from nosema. Like we just clean them up and we send them right back into the field. So that probably doesn't help things either. But we do call out older equipment and maybe equipment that's getting a bit dark. Although I say that, and I bought used equipment when I first started, and it was old when I bought it, and I still have it in the hives. So it's got to be over 50 or 60 years old, and it's still going. So I don't know.
Yeah,
we,
the nosema problem. The only thing I know that I'm also working on a video on that I maybe I'm just gonna tell the end of the virus is propolis apparently helps. If you
oh,
can get propolis, get the extract and put in the feeder, apparently get rid of nosema.
that's one thing. Carrie is, I kind of give her a little bit of a loose reins and selecting some of the stock within my apiary to breed from. We do have like a process where we select our breeders. We have a flag system we employ, and I have a criteria to follow. And I say, Carrie, there's 1,500 hives. Bring me back the best 15. And she goes out there and she finds it. And she's selecting for propolis because she hears all the good things about that. So we're selecting for that too. But also just to think of it, I was just in a meeting with someone from Alberta, and they are looking into irradiation and sending more of our bee equipment through irradiation to satisfy some of the problems. Maybe not so much about American foul brood, like that works with American foul brood, but they're also looking at, I don't know, do you know anything about irradiation killing viruses?
Yeah, it does, and I know a lot of people in Florida that have in their big operation they spend 25-30 thousand dollars a year in radiation, but they claim it's a completely different operation.
Yeah, we're hearing that up here too. So there's a little bit of investment, and guys are maybe looking this way as being an opportunity to clean up our boxes for situations like nosema, maybe because it'd solve that problem. And then looking at viral, like residual viral infections. But then I don't know how long it stays within wax within the brood nest. But if it lingers there, then irradiation might be an idea to treat the boxes to help relieve the hives of diseases.
Yeah, lots of things we can talk about. Yeah, but for nosema, I know for treatment and prevention, if you find a way to extract and put in your feed, uh, there is three independent laboratories that publish the same results, which is always good when different people from different locations test the same thing and get the same result. Is
Hmm.
something that I'll bring to the show.
Yeah, you should do that.
More question here. There is a little joke, and if my wife is here, just for her. Berto, yes, she say that.
Well, my wife says the same thing.
So, Garden is asking you moisture in hives during winter. Your thoughts?
Yeah,
How you deal with that?
I winter primarily inside, so I have
Yeah,
much more of a controlled environment. Um, I won't comment on outdoor colonies right now. I know Etienne here is a part of. He's done a lot of work. That's the guy you should talk to, Humberto. He's done a lot of work in cold weather situations where he's restricting ventilation and maintaining the integrity of the cluster and having them handle all those dynamics in themselves, and feels over ventilation is causing a detriment. I'm not going to talk about that right now, but inside the shed, if we do have moisture issues, it's usually because for one thing, the feed's not prepared properly. Maybe we had a poor fall and the bees didn't process it properly, and there's a lot of open combs. And the humidity in the air in the shed, if the humidity is high and I don't have my air circulating enough, it'll absorb that moisture, and then you'll see the honey start falling from the combs and out the front entrance, and that's typically a bad sign. So what we try to do is within the shed we keep open fronts. I try to keep enough air circulation to keep all the air mixed So as it's mixing in the shed, then we can expel that moisture. But for the most part, I mean, in the prairies, and it's so cold, we're bringing in -20 weather, or I mean -20 air into a warm room and expelling it. So we just zap that room full of the moisture in there. So it's more of a situation through the heart of winter that we have too dry of a situation going on inside.
How frequently you need to replace the air? You
That's a really good question. I have everything based on a thermostat, so it's all temperature based, and I target a temperature primarily. And I typically don't have enough of an issue with humidity that I have to, try to pull the humidity from the air. I know I was talking to guys who winter down in the States, places further south, like in Florida, where lots of humidity down there,
yeah.
and they're trying to bring these bees into the cellars with refrigeration to manage all these conditions, and they're having trouble with humidity in these cellars because it's just so humid down there with the air exchange and such. So they had to put a little more effort into pulling the water from the air in the shed. And it's something I don't have to consider up here. But my target, if your next question, hey, what's your target? Well, my target for humidity, I find, is 45% in my shed, because that's just, it's not too wet that in the edges of the combs you'll get mold, sometimes a stagnant air, but it's wet enough that the bees are able to, as they perspire, that the condensation forms around the edges of the clusters. And I actively watch to see there's little water droplets, and the bees will actually drink this condensation. I think that's important. So I try to, maintain, if it's really dry, like 15%, 10% in that shed, I'll start dumping water on the floor just to try to bring that humidity up, just to try to give them a little more of that moisture in the air so we don't dry them out.
Interesting, interesting. One more for you. You're the winter expert.
In your opinion, which would you say is better for the hive in winter? A cold day where they use energy to keep the hive temperature up, or a warm day where the hive activity consumes the energy? And that all depends on how much resources you have in the hive at the
Yeah,
time. So if it's a big colony, and especially if they start brooding later in winter, brooding can be a death sentence if they start up too early in the winter, if they don't have enough resource on hand, because they got to maintain, instead of a hive going into winter and maybe slacking on some of the conditions that they have to maintain as if they were brooding, they don't use a lot of resources at that time, because they kind of, they just get themselves through. But as soon as there's a demand to brood, they need the humidity, they need the warmth, they need all that energy and the food just to maintain what's going on in there. So it just zaps all that, everything, all the resources they have within that nest. And you got to make sure either it's there for them, or it will be really shortly, and they will pretty much eat themselves to death. I know some of the Italian strains, we have trouble up here because they just get going too early and they just eat too much. Big colonies, beekeepers love big colonies, but it's just too tough in conditions up here. So we use kind of like a Carniolan type bee, like that dark German type, and they're a little more conservative. So they, maybe they won't spark up as fast. They'll hold back a little bit more, but as soon as that hammer drops, they explode when they have what they need at hand. So they could, as long as that cluster is adequate when it's cold and they're on honey, they'll be fine. When it warms up, they get more active, they eat more. So they just got to make sure they have more at hand. When in my shed, I'll just kind of yap a little bit more about that. In my shed, I have some big colonies inside. I have some medium colonies. Um, I want to keep that shed cooled, and I want to keep that shed non-active, because I don't want them to burn up all that energy because they're too warm and they're moving and all this. I want them to kind of stay stagnant, just kind of stay slow, so they're not eating so much, because I only have them in a single box. Especially these big colonies, if I know I got them plugged out, but if they're too active, they're going to eat too much and they're going to starve, and they're not going to do anything for me in the spring if they're dead. So I'm a little bit concerned. That's why I put so much attention to them this last couple of weeks, just to try to cool that shed down to make
yeah.
sure I don't have warm
I
spots.
think you published what, 3 or 4 videos about the shed and the controlling the humidity and temperature. You're always there.
Yeah, I was quite concerned, but I think I have it under control now.
Good. All right, next one here. Inside the Hive TV, that's me. Some beekeepers swear by tea tree oil against nosema. Was there any actual research done to verify it's true? I'm not sure, Lagrange. I never saw a study that I was happy about that. I only saw beekeepers telling stories. Uh, and nosema is a very tricky one. It's a fungus that is so tough in the outside. Uh, for example, I'll give you an example. Even in a laboratory, when we need to do molecular tests on them, we need to use a completely different protocol to break them up because they're so tough. For other organisms, with bacteria, with other fungi, we have a specific acid. We have this formulation. We keep there for a couple hours. Done. We break it. You get the DNA or RNA from it. Those molecules that we want to study. Done. Nosema, oh man, it's an operation of 2 days with different acids and high temperatures and beads and break them and smashing them until we break them. So it's just to give you an idea of how tough the spore is, and outside. But once they release the cell and penetrate the cell to start to replicate inside the cell of the meat gut, that's where they're going to be more vulnerable. But then they're not in the outside world, so they're inside the cell. So they're protected by the cell of the honeybees. So it's very difficult to have something that we're going to deliver. They're going to reach them there. I think need to be by feeding something that we feed that cross those barriers and don't mess up with the cell. Might have some, and I think propolis make a lot of sense, because bees consume and select propolis for a reason for millions of years, and I think that make a lot of sense to me. But I don't have more information about tea tree oil. I'm sorry. Casey, is a acid is a normal acid. You find this very cheap, and people use to disinfect surfaces. Excuse me. I can send you some information if you want, Casey. Okay, moisture condensation in the hive in the winter. To me, at least, indication too much ventilation, which prevent the bees. Your thoughts?
He's saying that moisture condensation in the hive in winter, to me at least, indicates too much ventilation, which prevents the bees from keeping the stable hive temperature. I think if you talk to,
Depends where you are, right?
yeah, you talk to someone like Etienne, it almost sounds like he would agree with that. If the bees are constantly trying to, uh, uh, if the ventilation is changing the conditions within the cluster to the point where the bees have to then fight to regain those conditions, there's that constant back and forth to try to maintain that condition. And I think there's an argument over ventilation can cause trouble, and maybe causes issues with moisture and condensation. So maybe we should be approaching this issue a little bit differently. Just to exaggerate on that just a little bit, I'm not sure if I'm answering his question or not, but as a commercial beekeeper, we have to be aware of certain other situations at hand that we have to manage also. When I used to winter outside, uh, you put your bees, you wrap them up, and they get covered in snow. And one of the reasons we used upper entrances for ventilation is to help the hives get out when they got covered with snow. And actually, we get snowbanks over top of the bee yard, and the heat generated from inside was going up through that upper entrance and melting a little cavern in these snowbanks, just allowing an entrance, right? I walked over top of this one drift and I fell down into this melted cavern, and these bees had actually kept their hives open because of the heat coming from the cluster. And without that upper entrance, the bottom, I mean, it was all iced up. They can't get out. So you got to make sure that we provide the conditions uh, to manage those types of situations. So I think a happy medium would be to, if we're going to provide ventilation to these colonies outside, is to make sure it's maybe restricted a little bit so we're not over ventilating. And then the hives within the boxes aren't fighting to maintain those conditions. So I don't know. Did I answer that question?
I don't even know if it was a question. I think he was giving his thoughts and want to know if you agree with him. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think you elaborated on it. Excuse me. All right. Yeah, here we go. Do we have problems with sugar water feed fermenting?
I don't. And the reason why I don't is because I feed a heavy sugar at all times. Just for that reason, I don't want to be bothered with worrying about whether it's going to ferment or not. My objective with feeding is very specific, kind of like the way I feed my protein patties. It's very specific. I mean, this stuff's expensive, and we have to make sure what we're doing is actually translating into benefit. In the spring, generally, when we're feeding our sugar, it's to spark them up, just to get them going. We're not feeding to plug them out, so we're just flashing syrup at them. So I'm continually watching my nests as they're bringing in all the nectar naturally from the trees and the bushes and whatever. I'm looking for that syrup ring around that brood nest. And if that colony is wet, I hold back on the sugars and just let nature provide. But when they start to dry out a little bit, if we get through a dearth or whatever, I'll start flashing it at them. And it doesn't matter what type of sugar I flash at them, it does the same thing. All I'm looking for is just to make sure there's that open syrup or open sugar around that brood nest at all times to make sure that they have the food they need to be able to develop the nest. Like I put a lot of attention onto protein, but protein's only half the battle. And I think we don't spend enough attention on the actual act of feeding sugar, which is extremely easy to do. And we know it translates instantly like that. But what I do is I spend more time feeding sugar than I actually spend on the sugar, if that makes sense. So I just send my guys out and we just put a little bit out of the time just to try to keep the nests wet. And sugar is expensive. I don't want to waste money on it, just to keep those nests progressing. But later on in the fall, when their objective is to bulk these colonies up for winter, it like there's no question you feed them a heavy sugar just so they don't have as much work to do, so they can prepare that sugar for the winter stores ahead of them. So
All right. All right. Another one for you, yeah. Do you recycle the combs in your supers every year?
no, the the combs and the supers primarily are in tip top condition, and they stay there. As soon as like, I always drop in foundation just to help um, drop a bunch of energy. The big colonies, they'll grow, and sometimes they plug boxes out. And if you have a frame of foundation in there, it just puts a little more of their work into more of a useful place or building out comb. But once it becomes a honey box, she lives there for the rest of his life. I don't cycle down either. What I do is, uh, if we call out combs in the brood nest, we put foundation down there for much the same reason, for them to drop a lot of energy. So my honey supers stay as honey boxes. Well, hopefully as long as I have a beekeeping career.
Okay. One more for you. The Newbie Journal.
Yes, I'm familiar with Etienne. He has some very interesting work up there. Um,
This is the gentleman you were talking about?
yeah,
Okay.
I think it's probably minus 40 up there right now. And he's a smaller scale beekeeper. He has a lot of monitors within his nests, and he's observing the differences of different hive setups and how that cluster reacts to those different hive setups. One of them is ventilation, top ventilation. Another one is slatted racks underneath the cluster itself, and it's absolutely fascinating. He's got this huge data set. He's a man who loves numbers, I guess, because he just crunches all these numbers and then forms these predicted models, and then from that he extracts information on how to better prepare the nests. And he's in really extreme conditions. I know back in October, I believe end of October, he's already talking minus 40. I was like, whoa, pretty cold. And I thought I noticed him say here, I think that's him on the chat, but I think he said minus 38, so it's pretty cold up there too. So those are really cold conditions. And kind of like what I said before, pushing the boundaries, right? Pushing the boundaries on these bees to see what they can achieve, and you push them up against their boundaries to help understand the bee a little bit better. And I think what Etienne has going on there is just digging into that extreme boundary to see where we can take them, and just to help us understand the setup a lot better. So I guess the question is it possible for large scale? And I think it is, because I think what the argument is, and maybe Etienne would correct me if I'm wrong, but over ventilation is what he's arguing. He's not arguing that ventilation, upper ventilation is bad. It's just over ventilation is bad, because I think he's found the correlation where over ventilation is put too much strain on the colony trying to reestablish the conditions they want. Whereas if you have less ventilation, then that continual airflow through the hive isn't as extreme. So that's what I would say on that. But you'd have to talk to Etienne to get the real details and the nuts and bolts on that whole issue.
All right. I think this is for me. Current pest control. I'm in Texas, and I have seen you have worked with Africanized strains. Do you just keep those genetics, or do you try to breed it out? Well, that was my normal when I was in Brazil. I was born in the middle of those bees. I didn't know any other bees at the time, so I never breed them. And my dad liked to keep them really hot, really aggressive, really defensive. He always claimed that he didn't need fences when they have those bees. And it's not easy. I would say it's not fun. And for a long time, I hate bees because of that. My dad pushed me to do these things, and I hate bees for a long time. I lost a dog and a lot of drama. My father almost died a couple of times. It's not fun. But in Florida, I don't know. Texas, is illegal in Texas, because I know Florida is illegal. You have to requeen if you have Africanization there. I don't know about Texas. There is pros and cons, I would say, working with both of them. I enjoy calm bees now a lot. I can enjoy them more, and there is always more time to appreciate and look at the brood and more details. You don't have that. You don't have that time with the Africanized bees. You can't. It's impossible. Even if you stop and look, there is so many in front of you. You can't see anything. So yeah. Even if you want to breed them here, I don't think you can. If you're talking about U.S., and I think the same applied to Texas. So I don't want to be live on internet, giving you bad advice that put me in jail.
An interesting thing just based on that, and I know the queen breeders in California don't have Africanized bees, but I used to base my entire operation bringing bees in from all over the world, really, from California and Hawaii and New Zealand and all this, and bringing bees in. I found we go to the yard, we forget the smoker. We'd have to go back to the honey house and get the smoker because the bees are just hot. But ever since I started rearing my own queens in my operation here, it took about 3 years, but the bees are chill. We've never, if we forget the smoker, we wait till lunch and pick up the smoker on the way through. And it maybe, I don't know if there's anything to do with that aggressiveness. I don't know if they, with the Africanized, I don't think they winter very well, but maybe up here, we just naturally selected those ones out. And, I just regained the true stock itself again, and the gentleness come back. So that's something that I found night and day. And my guys, it's easy to work bees, and so anyway, food for thought.
A lot of sense. Make a lot of sense to me, because they don't go well. They need that keep feedback. They need to be recycling and reproducing fast, and when that happen in your conditions, they die. So that's why you get them back.
Yeah, so maybe there's something to that then,
because they need to be reproducing fast in high quantity, and consuming everything they have in their surroundings. If they don't have much and it's too cold, bye-bye. It's their nature.
So there's one good thing for a cold climate, right?
Yeah. See, here you go.
Mark it on the one check mark right there.
Yeah,
cold
one
weather,
check
good
mark.
Good for one thing.
Until something happened and they found a breed that is the genetic change, and here we go. All right, question. How many colonies can you run with an easy loader?
Oh, that's a good question. And I get this a lot. Um, if you want to get the job done fast, and if you have a lot of hives, don't buy an easy loader because it's going to slow you down. It's a lot cheaper to bring in foreign guys and just throw them in a yard and get the job done. Run fume boards, run blowers, run trucks, run forklifts. That's the way to go large scale. And there's no way around that. But you look at a beekeeper like me, like, my top end is going to be 2,000 hives at the most. I'm comfortable at 1,500 hives. I hire local kids from my school from town here, so I hire the great big ox of the guys, beekeeper's friend, but I also hire the slider kids, like some of the smaller girls. Whoever comes to the farm wants a job, I hire them. And one of the reasons I can do that is because I've um, modified the work on my farm so there's none of that awkward heavy lifting. The easier loader helps us with that. So I structured my entire farm around not lifting anything. The easier loader allows that. So when we pull honey, we go to the yard, we set the boards, there's no lifting. The empty boxes go in. We come back in 3 days. We lift them off the hive onto the truck. So there's no lifting there. It's just a process that follows through. And I find with one truck, with me and two guys in the yard with me, we can pull honey off 500 hives a week. Excuse me. And then that's what I have. My capacity in the honey house is basically that too, is about 500 hives worth through that 60 frame cowan. So it kind of matches up just perfectly for an operation that's anywhere between 1,000 to 1,500 hives. So you want to kind of target that 500 hive capacity a week. And if you can get that done, get your first pull done in 2.5 weeks. 3 is a long time, but focus on what your workload is, and then that's good. But then I also do all my hive movement with the easy loader too, because I hate dragging around trailers and forklifts. So it's easier just to pull the truck in, load these hives up on the truck, and off I go to the cement pad for the forklift there. So the investment I made within the easy loader, the hardest thing was to justify its expense and justify that purchase to my neighbors, because they're like, oh, what the hell do you buy that thing for? I should have just bought a forklift. That was the hardest part about it. It's just a matter of what did I need and what can I buy to help me for those needs, and then just getting married to it. So then I form all my functions around it to make it feasible.
All right. Why don't North American beekeepers change brood comb every year? We have great results in Denmark with this. Simple and effective.
Dollars and cents, right? I guess
Yep, I
we
think
just
that's the word.
we force our bees to handle really tough situations, and sometimes those tough situations, excluding American foul brood, those get burnt if you ever find them. So that's a caveat. But all the rest, I mean, the colony dies, we assess for the brood disease. We don't see the brood disease. We clean up the frames. We put it back into production. We stock the bees into them again. And you can see how that can be a problem, because the wax is like a sponge, and it's kind of holding all the residues of everything, and it's holding all the diseases and everything. So maybe it's not the best environment for the bees. So it's a good proactive practice to change the combs out. It's just, I have pretty hardy bees, and they seem to do fairly well. So yeah, that's all I can say about that. The best thing to do is change it out like that, but it costs a lot of money to switch out wax.
Yeah. All right. Casey, seed glacial acid correspond with the apple cider replication. Which is, I don't think it's gonna raise the pH. It's gonna lower the pH. When the pH goes down, that means becoming more acid. If it's going up, it's becoming more basic. I don't know. I never put glacic acid so for the bees to feed. So we need to be careful there. I know lots of different things can lower the pH. but a lot of different things that lower the pH can kill the bees too. So we need to be very, very
Yeah,
careful.
you got to be careful with that because I experimented with that too. You'll read studies from time to time, and I forget you had a program or a show about apple cider vinegar.
Yes, I did, and
Yeah,
create a lot of buzz about that. And I start to be very concerned about that kind of video because a lot of people start to try different things that make me a little concerned, not only by the safety of the bees, but the safety of the person too. So
yeah.
I think I need to be more careful next time.
That
And
and there's probably something around that, and that's something that we don't want to ignore because it's important. But a few years ago, I was experimenting with this other beekeeper, and we had some thought process. So, okay, we need to adjust the pH of the syrup to help the bees better um, handle our gut diseases because I just felt that a more acidic feed would provide the benefit. So I did that. I didn't do large scale. I did it on, I don't know, maybe
good move, good move. That's
yeah,
the way to go.
but 300 hives all the same. So that's still that's still a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
But you talk to some beekeepers that get ideas in their mind and they go all in and they don't even have controls. You're
Oh
like,
no,
oh, guys,
yes.
you got to kind of pull back a little bit. So, anyways, I adjusted the pH down to I think it was 3.5 to the syrup, and that's you know. So, anyways, they went in and they come out really small and struggling, and I directly correlate that to the syrup I fed them with the pH of 3.5 because all the rest of them that I didn't adjust the pH, they were dynamite. So I've never done that again.
All right. Here we go.
In the context of raising your own queens, how many California queens are imported into Manitoba each spring? And do you see those imported genetics having an impact on provincial mortality? Well, that is, I don't know how to approach that question. Geez. Could you prompt me on answering that question, Humberto? I don't know how to answer that.
I'm here thinking too. So how many Californian queens are imported into Manitoba?
I see what
It's
you're saying in
it's a
regards
spring.
to
And do you
bringing
see?
bees in, and you're bringing bees into a different area, and the traits of those queens or whatever aren't necessarily reflective to the area they're being brought in. Like you're being brought in from California, excuse me, California up into Manitoba, and you're thinking, well, how can a California bee survive Manitoba weather?
Yeah, that's the way I understand too.
Yeah, so it's the same bee though, right? There's a carniolan type, so they have all the traits, so they know how to handle winter. Maybe they don't know how to handle California weather maybe as efficiently.
Yeah.
It could be the opposite spectrum like that. But what I found um, when you start breeding your own bees, you start selecting for. Uh, there's two ways I can go about this. You bring in stock to be able to um, supply the queen needs you need to make the nukes and all this kind of stuff, but you're never selecting for the traits that are locally adapt to your area environment, and not only your area environment but your own management practice, right? So as soon as you start your breeding program where you're directly focused on selecting the bees that thrive in the area around you, but not the area but all the bad habits of myself, my beekeeper activities, then you start being able to manage all these circumstances, the bees themselves, right? You get 1 year, 2 years, 3 years into your breeding program, you start seeing the bees reflect what you want them to do. And it's really fun. You're pulling out all those traits that thrive within that certain environment. And, things just start coming together and thriving is really fun. But, I sell bees I'm very hesitant selling queens because I'm very specific on my breeding program, and I'll sell queens to a neighbor that maybe practices the same type of beekeeping practice I do, and they absolutely thrive over there. But then I'll sell queens to another guy that has a totally different way of keeping bees, and they fall flat. And then he gives me a phone call and says, "Ian, your bees are garbage." Says, "No, they're not really garbage. They're just used to my style." and I'm focusing in their traits and behaviors to, handle these conditions, and you're doing something completely different. So I can see queen breeders from California finding that frustrating. But what they do to manage that is they just find all those baseline positives in their breeding program that make everybody happy, and they focus on those generalized characteristics and they push them out, and it just kind of thrives everywhere, but not necessarily specific. Is it, they don't they're they don't focus in on all those minute details like my queens do. So I hope that made any sense. But my base stock that I started breeding from come from the genetics from California and from Hawaii. So these guys have top-notch breeding programs, which I started my program with. So I had a really good reserve of traits, and then I'm just exploiting all those traits within what I'm doing here.
Interesting. All right. I think this Lone Woodard. It's for me. How effective is UV light against viruses and honeybees? That's an interesting question. I tried to answer a couple of times, and theoretically it's supposed to work because UV cross-link protein and genetic material. So in the case of viruses, when you have UV light in a virus capsid, the virus cannot open and release the genetic material to start replication. But in practical life, when I go to the lab and I did that, I got a lamp with UV light and I put a tube with viruses close to the UV light for hours. And I test the virus, for example, IAPV. IAPV survived. I didn't try with the deformal wing virus, but I was just so frustrated with IAPV that I just give up the whole thing. I don't know if the UV was enough, like the sun. If you put the things in the sun, might be stronger. So maybe this is a whole project that need to be followed to test. But I like to do things in a more practical way because sometimes things in the lab doesn't really help. I want to do directly with the beekeeper. So I need to maybe to raise some money and visit Ian to do in his operation there.
Just watch. If you come up here, I'll put you to work.
Oh, okay. I hope I answered your question. No, sorry, I don't have a more straightforward answer. Okay, more questions here. Okay, it's moving. I think this is.
Oh, Saskatraz bees.
Yeah.
The question if they're more mite resistant or is Carniolan better in your area? So I think the Saskatraz are probably, I bet you they have a lot of those old German darker characteristics in them. Saskatraz is an interesting project, and I'd like to support it. I tap into them all the time. It's like the true survivor project up in northern Saskatchewan. They just put stock up there and they breed from the survivors year after year after year. And they're looking for what naturally is the progression to manage the mites. And they're seeing lots of success from that. But like who was I talking? Corey Stevens, he's a VSH breeder, and he says there's never, there's advantages, disadvantages. It's not that, it's trade-offs. So you're gaining something. What are you trading off, right? So you're gaining the ability to become tolerant to the mite or resistant or whatever you want to put terminology on that. But what's the trade-off on that? So there are some trade-offs with the Saskatraz line, maybe. Some would say more swarmy, maybe because that's a natural way of controlling mites, or maybe not as much honey production because they're swarming more. But what they did is they brought those genetics down to California, and Oliveras is kind of trying to include it into their breeding program. And I find that very interesting because Oliveras is like what do they raise 250,000 queens every year for sale. It's just a massive queen breeder. And I love seeing guys of that scale putting effort into focusing on positive traits, much in the manner like that, because those guys are going to drive the market. And they seem to be like, I buy my queens directly from Ray when I do my own breeding, but I bring the Saskatraz in. I do my own analysis over a year or two to select the better ones out of the bunch before I put them into my breeding program. But whether or not they that mite mite resistant is a pretty heavy term, maybe more so mite tolerance, but whether or not they're able to translate that same mite tolerance through multiple generations like that, I think it gets diluted by the time I start breeding my own queens. But the fact of the matter is, there's still a focus on those traits. And the more we focus on those traits, I think the more we're going to see expression of it and progress our way through the situation like this. So that's my way through it. I just love Saskatraz. I mean, I show them on my videos. You tip the box of bees going into winter, and it's like 10 frames of bees nicely clustered sitting in there, and they don't eat a lot of feed. I don't know what they use, but they go in heavy and they come out heavy, and they're dynamite. I can't say enough about Saskatraz, but they're like any other queen. You have good ones and bad ones. I just like to support the programs like that because it's very progressive.
Interesting.
Are you capable of feeding liquid syrup in the shed? Yes. That's one of the advantages of keeping bees in a shed is if you notice there's starvation, then you can entrance feed. And actually, I know beekeepers that take advantage of this regularly, where they go and they'll stimulate maybe into February just to feed them a bit of syrup, thinking maybe they can get a little brood nest sparked up inside. So it kind of gets a jump on development when they put them out from the sheds. But it's an F ton of work. Like one year I ran into a tough fall and I didn't get the syrup into my colonies. I put them indoors and it was a longer type spring. We held them in a little bit longer and I started seeing colonies drop to starvation. So I went through and I bought all these little hamster feeders and I put a little Coke bottle full of syrup and I fed my colonies. And that probably got me away from a massive loss from starvation. But oh man, I'm going to put my energy into feeding my colonies in the fall because that's much easier than feeding the bees inside the shed. So if I ever have to do it again, it's my last ditch attempt. And it's because I didn't get my job done in the fall. So I like to get my colony set up, put them into the shed. And, I can't help myself. I'm always in there, but try to stay out of the shed and not look at them and then put them outside where I can manage them again.
All right.
How have the sunflowers worked against nosema?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing. And maybe some of my comments in my videos referred to a study regarding the act of the pollen itself somehow relieving the gut issue. I forget, but for honeybees it was nosema, but for the bumblebee it was another bacteria or fungal disease in the bumblebees. But they found a correlation between sunflower pollen and decreased levels of fungal infection within these within the bees and the bumblebees. I don't know if there's anything to that, but do you want to hear another observation I made over the last 4 years? Since I've been, and this is, I'm going to put a caveat on this. This is just a farmer's observation, but we've had a kind of a crop rotation change within my area to more sunflowers because of certain dynamics going on. Even our farm are growing a complement of sunflowers within the rotation. And I'll have these pollinator strips I'm growing within my fields itself, just around the edges, trying to provide more pollen for my bees later on in the fall to help with the nourishment. But I'll put sunflowers in there too. But ever since I started growing sunflowers, and ever since my neighbors all my hives has been exposed to the sunflowers later in August, I've noticed that my nosema counts have dramatically decreased. And actually, I've gone into winter this year, I said, with deformed wing virus with very low counts, but I have no nosema going into my shed this winter. And that's the first time I've kept track of nosema my entire life because it's a very easy one to track. And I've never had zero counts going into my shed, and I can't correlate it other than I'm having huge trouble 5 years ago. And there's been a shift downwards, and sunflowers has introduced itself into the area. I changed my feed I'm feeding more sucrose instead of corn syrup, so that's also changed. I've also stopped treating for nosema with the drug, and I'm focusing more on nutrition. So, am I seeing it a direct reflection from the sunflowers, or are there other things going on? I'm not sure yet. But when I read that paper in regards to that, I'm making a link in my head. I'm thinking, ooh, that possibly could be a case there. But I find it so interesting that I'm I'm focusing my pollinator strips with sunflowers still.
All right. All right. Here you go.
Please help me figure out why my winter loss is 80. I duplicate everything with your bees and they die. Any suggestions? I live in Minnesota. Yes. So I get this a lot. A lot of people watch what I do and they try to mimic me and then hope for the same results. And you touched on this a little earlier, Humberto, in regards to that vinegar or whatever. You put it out there and you have all these people, you know, watch and absorb all this information, and then they get in trouble because what they're doing all of a sudden uh, it didn't quite translate the same way. And information is important, but to be able to use that information wisely is the next step. So when guys are trying to manage their hives, I tell them the first thing they have to do is you have to ask yourself, what are you trying to achieve? As soon as you can answer that question, what do you want to do? Then you follow that up with, how am I going to achieve that? And then you look at beekeepers around you. Then you look at beekeepers like me and you say, okay, this is what I want to achieve. That's a behavior that we need to manage. This is how Ian does it. This is how Humberto does it. This is how somebody else does it, and bring all that together as information to build, help you form the management plan then to achieve what you're trying to achieve. Because if I'm getting guys that are saying, well, what time of year do you knock your bees down into singles? I want to winter my bees in single boxes. And the first thing I ask them is, why would you want to do that? And they say, well, because your bees, they look so good, they look so strong. And it's just because it's the way that you're supposed to keep bees. And I says, no, it's not. It's the way I keep bees. And the reason why I keep them in singles because of four really important reasons. And the single box that suits my management style perfectly, right? Do you have those four same reasons? The answer is no. Then why are you attempting to do that? So I can't answer why you're having a loss of 80%, which is very high, but there's circumstances going on there and you got to figure that out. So you kind of look and try to understand what's going on. And if you can figure out what's going on, then you can address it. So that's about as best I can do on that. But
Yeah, it is really hard to assess these things, especially from the internet. When I do these things, I spend most a week, picking and testing things in operation, testing the water, see how the crew is doing something, the kind of box the guy have, how they handle this. It's so many details that with the same information, depending of the every operation is a completely different individual. Is a different thing, and you also always need to optimize for your operation. Something that works in your neighbor, it will not work with you if because you are different. You are different. Whatever you bought and things that you have, maybe the water or the boxes or something is different, and that thing is different. And if you don't know the basics there to adjust to get the results that you want, it's not going to work. And that's actually almost all the work that I do now is to go to these places and figure out what's going on. And I see a lot of these people following recipes and stop thinking about why that recipe is that way, and they
yeah,
need to understand the behind the scenes, why the recipe was written, for what's the objective for that recipe.
yeah, I'm going to all these conferences all across the country and down in the States, and I'm going up in front of these guys and I'm telling them how I'm keeping bees. And I make sure before I present to the crowd to remind them that I'm not there to tell you how to keep bees. The reason why these guys invited me down to talk to them is just to provide perspective on how I keep bees and how I understand them. And I try to convey the fact that if I can show you how I keep bees and how I manage things and how I understand things, maybe that'll help with your understanding of your bees. And then if you understand what's going on, you can say, hey, you know, maybe I could take a little piece there to add it to my management plan, or a little piece here, and just adding knowledge and adding it from perspective just overall helps your understanding, so that we can manage these issues. It's not a cookie cutter type situation. Is we got to put things together appropriately, and it's just very dynamic. So that's very hard to convey, though, extremely hard to convey, because you look at grain farming, and it almost is cookie cutter. You buy that great big bitchin' tractor, you buy the seed, you put down the fertilizer, and away you go, right? You have agronomists come out to give you help with chemistries and such, but it's not like that with beekeeping at all. You got to be very reflective to what's your situation, because your situation is unique from everybody else's, especially, everybody's trying to achieve different things from their own stock. So that's what makes this very interesting also. So maybe
Yeah.
I'll just leave it there. Yeah.
Yeah, it sometimes is small things. Another day, actually, not another day, was 1 or 2 weeks ago. I went to his place, and they have this problem when the owner of the operation prepared the feed. Apparently, everything was well, and when they leave in the hands of somebody else, things the bees didn't never behaved. What I found out was the guy doing the feeding was using a water from a different source, and that
Oh,
was the messing up. Sometimes it's not, it's something simple, something so ridiculous. We need to,
yeah.
details matters. So okay, let's moving in. Jan, you let me know if you have to go, or how much time you have. Okay.
Yeah, probably another 10 minutes would be good. Then I'll
Okay.
go grab another eggnog and join the family for the end of the Christmas
And
celebration.
all right, you are fantastic. Thank you very much for that.
Every opportunity I get to talk bees, I take it. So
Uh,
I feel very privileged to come here and talk to you, actually.
thank you, thank you. I think all of us appreciate it. So
Do
let's.
you set your comb to be rubbed clean after extraction, or do you store it wet? Yeah, primarily I store it wet. I don't send it back out to the yards to rub clean. That's a lot of work. Uh, we extract twice. We pull the honey the first time, send it back to the yards to fill up again, and then by that time the flow is over and everything goes straight into storage. So it's stored wet. But when we extract our combs, we have steam within the extractor, so it really dries the combs out. So when we send them to storage, they're pretty dry, anyways. Yeah.
All right. More questions for you, Ian.
How many boxes can you put in your shed? Can your fans handle more, or are they maxed out? So yeah, that's a good question. What's the stats on that? I think the cubic feet per colony is 15 to 20 cubic feet per hive is what they suggest. But more so, it's just the ability to maintain the temperatures within the shed. We're targeting at 4 degrees Celsius, and it seems to be that magic number. They're the most efficient with your feed. A little colder, let's say we get around freezing, we've run into condensation issues because of that variability of the temperature. But if we get too warm, they get too active, they eat too much, and when they start bearding, we seem to get more drop on the floor, so they don't do as well. So we like to keep it about 4 degrees. Some guys, I know there's a lot of interest down in the States right now with wintering bees indoors, and the only way they can achieve that is with refrigeration, to be able to get them through warm periods of time. That's very costly. I think the quote on my shed was $100,000. Well, 75,000 5 years ago. It'd be a little bit more now. So I'm guessing around $100,000, and that's a lot of investment for. I only needed like 3 or 4 days throughout the spring, because we have the luxury of having bitchin' cold weather pretty much all winter to help us keep our colonies cold. And in their boxes. So we only have maybe 1 or 2 warm events through the winter. But the question was, can your fans handle more? See, the trick with ventilation, because I don't have refrigeration, to keep the sheds cool when it warms up outside, obviously it's going to be above that 4 degrees. But the trick is to have enough airflow through the shed to be able to keep the temperature within the shed the same as outside. So you're moving enough air through the shed to remove all that heat. So then when the cool weather comes that following night, the shed instantly drops in temperature following the temperature outside. When you don't have enough airflow through the shed and the shed warms up, you don't have enough airflow then to bring it down. So it's just a continually hot shed, which causes problems. And beekeepers who aren't very well equipped, you'll sometimes hear through these warm spells that through the night you'll open the doors just to help purge that air out to cool a shed down to get them ready for the next warm day coming ahead of them. So, yeah, so that's a little conversation behind that.
All right. How is my friend? Oh, the stingless bees. Yeah, I made a video where I was in Brazil and I miss my stingless bees. We don't have them here. I grown up around all these 10 different species of bees and we don't have them here. It's just fun. They're fun. I'm trying to teach my dad to have now because he got allergic and I got allergic now too. So
yeah. My wife was for 18 years. She was allergic. She used to help me in the bees, and then she got stung while with child. And I guess when you're pregnant, maybe your body chemistries are changing. So she started reacting very badly. So she was like, typical beekeeper's wife who's allergic to bees. So we bought a camper. So she stayed at the lake all summer while I was beekeeping. But she went through therapy and it took her 4 years of therapy. And now she's good. They say she's cured. They've done blood tests on her. And now she can come back to the yards and help me work. And she got stung, one in the foot and one in the lip, legit stung, and she didn't die. So that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. Yeah. I celebrate now every time I get stung and don't end up in a hospital. I'm celebrating it.
Yeah.
I know it's hard. I got stung like a maniac in Brazil. But then I got here. Then I stopped to get stung a lot and things changed. Then one day I got stung once and everything. I end up in a hospital. I pass out, stop breathing, all the jazz.
Yeah, the body's funny and the venom, the allergic reaction is so unpredictable. We just don't know, right? So we got to be careful at all times.
Yeah, it could happen with anybody. And so that's why when I see people, with all kind of advices to new beekeepers, and I'm always concerned about some advices that I see out there. Okay.
All right. So what I'll do is I'll give you 2 more questions.
Yes.
I'm losing my voice anyways, but this will be one of them. I'm convinced and focused on nutrition and temperature control. I'm convinced as bees focus a lot of resource and evolutionary bees focus on small ranges of temperatures in both brood and honey. Am I reading that right? I'm convinced.
Yeah, I'm convinced and focus on nutrition and temperature control. I'm convinced as bees focus a lot of resources and evolutionary bees focus on small ranges of temperature in both brood and honey. Not sure I understand the new
I want to understand that question, but I don't think I think I got an idea, but I don't know if I understand enough to answer that.
Okay, so last one. Guys, if I skip one, please don't get mad at me. That's the way it works. I'm sure we have a lot of good time here. So
January 2nd is my last day of hourly employment, and I begin my full-time farm beekeeping operation. Oh, that's awesome.
Congratulations.
So next year, what time is the best for you, for my wife to come up and cruise you for encouraging me?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you're going to curse me.
Yeah, I think you're in trouble.
Well, well, if you're if you want to come up for a beer, I can entertain you. Oh, Thomas Stone. Yeah, I know that name. Beekeeping is a funny thing. It just kind of grabs people a different way,
Yep.
and it just kind of channels that enthusiasm, and you just kind of turn that enthusiasm into a business, and all of a sudden, before you know it, you're doing something you actually love, and you start looking at your day job as being something that's just in the way. So then the question I get from beekeepers all the time is, how do I make that transition from my day job to a full-time beekeeper? And it's a tough one, especially when when that person doesn't have connections to the farm itself, and they don't understand what it takes to be a sole proprietor on the farm, where you're just hardly getting through some years, and other years you have this huge bounty, and it's just kind of like a reflex back and forth like that. And you got to be able to take all the years together, even them out, to be able to make this a living. So you're going to sacrifice some years, but you're going to find opportunity other years. You're going to struggle, like this last summer. Man, that was one of the hardest years I've ever managed, through that heat and the smoke and just the tough conditions, with just the economics behind it, just about going broke. There's so many things there that you have to appreciate, but you got to persevere and get through it. And then when you get through it, you're getting on to that next year, hopefully to be better ahead. And I think that's what kind of drives a lot of farmers, is just that, looking ahead. And we've felt the hardship, and then when we get rewarded those few years with the bounty of the crop, it's a feeling unlike anybody can appreciate. But to get to that point, you have to transition from your day job, which is a steady paycheck, steady work, totally different lifestyle. You're planning your weekends, you're planning your holidays, then you're throwing yourself into a job that has no rules, and you just have to make them up yourself and make sure it works out. Because if it doesn't, then you got to go back to that day job, right? So that transition is a hard one, and especially with time management. There's a lot of beekeepers complain about hobby beekeepers as being problems in the area of polluting, disease, and all this bullshit. But I say, well, that's true, but I see a bigger risk with those sideline beekeepers. Those beekeepers are aspiring to be a commercial beekeeper, a full-time beekeeper, but they don't have the time because they have the day job. They don't have the time to keep the husbandry up within their hives, and they make a mistake, and all of a sudden their hives are suffering, and then it's spreading. And it's just not one or two hives, it's hundreds of hives spread around the area. So, we need to provide a little bit of support for these guys to help them transition. You provide that support, not any other way, but guidance, right? Guys like you, Humberto, putting on programs like this where you just submerge the industry with information just to help us kind of guide ourselves through some of these issues. And the one thing I like about this show of yours is you present in such a way that you're not afraid to put one side or the other. One side's out there, drums up a shit ton of attention and discussion and conversation. Then you'll put something completely contrary, and then then you'll grab the discussion from the other side. And that conversation is very important as we're trying to figure things out, because in the way we're farmers, we're trialing, we're little scientists on our own trying to figure things out. And this is science. It's the baseline science is what we're doing. And more information is what we need. And I think you're doing a lot of work in regards to that, helping the community. And with guys like Thomas, they're making that transition. Just they need this conversation and guidance to be able to help them make it. So
That's why I
anyways, there you
came.
go.
Yeah, I that was the promise I did. Dad hold me in the hand and said, "Why are you leaving your country? Why are you leaving Brazil and your family?" I said, "Well, they needed somebody to help the beekeepers." And then he said, "Look in me eye," said, "Remember that you're helping the beekeepers."
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
That's pretty powerful right there.
yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
So
Yeah.
that wraps up everything, guys. Thank you very much for your time. That was fun. I think, Jan, your time too. Thank you very much. I appreciate. I'm so happy that happened. Now I can move forward with the list of beekeepers that want to come to the show. I said no, need to be Jan first.
Well, I'm quite flattered with that. Yeah, I appreciate the attention. I just love talking bees, and
Yeah,
just the whole outreach to support industry. I'm a big part of that. I champion agriculture every time I can as a farmer, and I just have a direct connection to beekeeping. And there's so much opportunity here as beekeepers to reach every aspect of agriculture that I think we have a big voice, and we just need to use it a little bit more. So I appreciate you having me on here, and I think I'll get back to the Christmas celebrations here with some more eggnog, and we'll keep in touch.
All right. Enjoy. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye. Bye, guys.